Hidden behind the high walls of a grand estate, Chief Durojai, one of the most powerful men in the region, lived alone in eerie silence. To the world, he was a respected billionaire. But behind the marble floors and golden chandeliers lay a truth so dark, even the soil beneath his mansion refused to keep it buried. His pregnant wife, Adaora, and their two young sons had vanished years ago, their absence dismissed as an elite family's quiet relocation, until one brave little fruit seller, named Eniola, heard something beneath the earth that no one else dared to believe. What started as a child's curiosity unraveled a tale of guilt, grief, and a haunting far too personal to ignore. Stay with us as we unfold the mystery buried under a billionaire's home. And if stories like this captivate you, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Chief Durojai's mansion stood at the edge of the village like a forgotten monument, grand, towering, and unsettlingly quiet. Its tall black gates never opened for long, and its windows, though wide and numerous, never revealed the life inside. The villagers often passed by with quick steps, refusing to meet its gaze, as if the house itself was watching them. Over the years, they had grown used to the silence that wrapped around it like mist. But silence, as they would soon learn, has its own way of speaking. Whispers began to surface in hushed tones during market days. Some claimed they'd heard something at night, soft cries that floated from the house when the world slept. Others spoke of strange lights flickering in the upper rooms, even though no one had seen the chief outside in months. Many dismissed these stories as superstition, the kind that grows when curiosity meets fear. After all, Chief Durojai was not just any man. He was powerful, respected, and wealthy beyond imagination. His name opened doors and silenced questions. Years ago, he had shared that his wife, Adaora, pregnant with their third child, had taken the boys abroad to escape the stress of public life. But no one ever saw them again. No letters, no visits, no photos. Just silence. And people learned not to ask. But children notice what adults ignore. And one pair of eyes kept returning to that house, curious, innocent, and entirely unaware of the secrets buried beneath. Eniola was only 11, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too much too soon. She sold fruits from a woven tray balanced carefully on her head, calling out in cheerful tones that often hid the emptiness of her stomach. Each morning, she passed the mansion on her route, and each time, her steps slowed just a little. Something about that place pulled at her, not in fear, but in something else she couldn't name. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the air grew heavy, she paused outside the gates, the mangoes in her tray swaying slightly as she adjusted her stance. That's when she heard it. Faint, soft, almost like a distant lullaby, but broken by a stifled sob. She turned her head, certain it came from beneath the earth itself. Her heart pounded, and for a moment she thought of running, but she stayed, listening. The sound faded as quickly as it came. She told the story to the women in the market the next morning, but they only laughed gently, brushing her hair with calloused fingers and saying she must have dreamed it. But Eniola knew she hadn't. Over the next few days, she began lingering longer near the mansion, pretending to rest her feet, always listening. Each time the sound returned, sometimes a muffled weep, other times what seemed like a whisper just below the soil. The more she heard, the more she knew. Something or someone wanted to be heard. And Eniola, poor and invisible to most, was the only one who seemed willing to listen. The market was the village's heartbeat, a place where news traveled faster than wind and secrets had a way of slipping through loose lips. It was there, between the clatter of yams and the rhythm of bargaining voices, that whispers about Chief Durojai's past quietly returned. The tale of his wife, Adaora, had once been the stuff of envy. Beautiful, soft-spoken, and adored by her husband, she was often seen walking beside him in flowing wrappers, her two boys holding her hands. People remembered how the chief's eyes softened when he looked at her, how his voice lost its usual sharpness. But then, just like that, she was gone. Durojai announced that Adaora had taken the children to Europe for a break, and that they would settle there for a while. At the time, no one questioned it. The rich had their ways. But now, with Eniola's unsettling story, quietly making rounds among the traders, old memories were being pulled from where they had been buried. An elderly spice seller mentioned that she once saw Adaora crying near the markets, well weeks before her disappearance. A butcher claimed he noticed the chief's bodyguard loading large crates into the ground behind the mansion late at night. And an old widow swore she heard children calling out in the wind on the very night the family was said to have flown abroad. Still, no one said anything directly. Durojai was powerful. His money helped the local clinic, paid for the village water tank, and funded the school roof. Even if people had doubts, fear kept their mouths closed. But the soil has a way of remembering what human minds try to forget. And Eniola, the little girl with no voice in the world, was slowly becoming the center of a storm she never asked for. It happened during the heavy rains that marked the end of the dry season. The clouds had gathered all afternoon, and by dusk, the sky broke open with a thunderous cry. Water rushed through the streets, lifting litter and dust into swirling streams. That night, Eniola sought shelter under a tree not far from the mansion. She huddled there, soaked, her fruit tray empty and forgotten beside her. Lightning lit up the mansion grounds in brief, blinding flashes, and then she saw it. Near the side garden of the estate, the rain had eaten away at the earth, collapsing part of the neatly trimmed landscape. Something pale, long, and smooth stuck out from the soil. It looked like a bone. Eniola's breath caught. She rubbed her eyes, thinking it might be a branch, but the shape didn't change. The next morning, the area was cordoned off. Workers came quickly, no sirens, no police, just men in black with quiet mouths and hurried hands. By noon, the ground was filled in again, and new grass had been laid as if nothing had ever happened. But Eniola had seen. She tried to tell the woman who sold her gari, but was hushed with wide eyes and a shaking head. "You saw nothing, child. For your sake, forget it." But how could she? The image haunted her, more than the hunger, more than the cold. Something was buried under that mansion, something the rain tried to uncover. And if the soil cried once, it would cry again. Eniola began slipping closer to the mansion, not because she wanted to, but because the streets were no longer safe, and the mansion's high fence gave her a strange sense of protection. Most nights, she curled beneath an abandoned wooden cart just outside the estate, her thin wrapper doing little to keep out the cold. She kept her fruit tray close, using it as both a pillow and a shield. Her world had taught her early that even silence had a texture, sometimes soft like night winds, sometimes heavy like a buried scream. And one night, that silence changed. She had just closed her eyes when she felt a strange stillness settle over the air, the kind that made the hairs on her arms rise. Then it came, not a cry, not a whisper, but a voice. It was low and hoarse, like someone trying to speak through water or soil. The sound didn't come from the mansion itself. It came from the ground beneath her. At first, she thought it might be her imagination, the hunger playing tricks again. But the voice returned, slow and sorrowful, like a lullaby dragged across a broken heart. She couldn't understand the words, but their pain was unmistakable. It wasn't anger or fear, it was longing, guilt, and unbearable sadness. Eniola pressed her ear to the earth, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The voice rose and fell like waves, repeating something over and over, not in a language she recognized, but in one her heart seemed to understand. She lay there for what felt like hours, unmoving, listening. Every now and then the voice would pause, and she would feel a chill breeze sweep across her skin, even though the night was still. It was as if the ground itself was breathing. The next night, she returned to the same spot, not out of fear, but with an unexplainable need. The voice came again, softer this time, like it had been waiting for her. Each visit deepened the connection. Sometimes she heard humming, a gentle melody, like a mother trying to soothe a child. Other nights, it was sobbing, muffled and broken, the kind of grief that couldn't be spoken aloud. For the first time in her life, Eniola felt chosen, not pitied, not dismissed, chosen. Something buried beneath that mansion was trying to be heard. And she, the girl no one listened to, had become the one soul who did. It began with restless nights. Chief Durojaye, once a man whose footsteps echoed with authority, started pacing the marble halls of his mansion like a prisoner. The staff noticed the change first, his eyes sunken, hands trembling, voice cracking when he thought no one was listening. He spoke less, slept even less, and began avoiding mirrors altogether. Something was haunting him, not just in dreams, but in the waking hours when the silence in the house grew heavier than stone. He would pause mid-sentence, staring off as though someone was standing just behind him. More than once, the housemaid, Mama Tenny, found him muttering apologies to the empty hallways, his fingers clutching a scarf that didn't belong to him. At first, the household doctor blamed stress and age. A man with Durojaye's responsibilities, he said, would naturally suffer from sleeplessness and strain. But it wasn't just that. Soon, the chief refused to eat meals prepared in the house. He ordered food from outside and even then barely touched it. The security guards reported hearing strange things, glass shattering in rooms that were untouched, whispers behind doors that had been locked for years. And always, at the same hour each night, Chief Durojayi would stand by the garden, staring at the earth as though it were speaking to him. His health declined rapidly. His once impeccable posture collapsed into a frail hunch, and the deep voice that once commanded boardrooms now quivered with fear. He often woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, begging for someone named Adaora to please forgive me and for the boys to come back. The staff grew afraid. One by one, they began to leave. Drivers, cleaners, even the lawyer Mama Tenny eventually packed up her things, whispering prayers under her breath as she walked out. The mansion became quieter than ever, but the silence was no longer empty. It was crowded, thick, alive. Chief Durojaye was now alone with whatever memories or spirits he had buried beneath the tiles and trimmed grass. The villagers noticed the sudden decline. Rumors bloomed again, more vivid this time. Some said the chief had gone mad. Others claimed he had been cursed. But only one person knew, truly knew, that it wasn't madness or superstition. Eniola had heard the cries. Now, the man who buried the truth was being forced to listen to it, every hour of every sleepless night. Days passed, and the mansion grew darker, inside and out. Vines began to creep up the sides of the once pristine walls. The garden wilted, and a strange smell, faint but constant, hovered around the grounds. From her usual sleeping spot beneath the cart, Eniola noticed the front gates were no longer tightly shut. No guards stood watch. No lights flickered from the upstairs rooms. Curiosity had long rooted itself in her heart, and now, with no one to stop her, it bloomed into boldness. One late evening, just as the sun dipped below the trees, Eniola crept quietly through the side entrance, the one the maids used long ago. Inside, the air was thick, like it hadn't moved in years. Dust clung to her feet with each step. The house felt frozen, pictures still hanging, furniture still arranged, yet lifeless. She moved slowly, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The humming she had heard from outside now echoed faintly through the walls. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, guiding her steps like a thread. She followed it past the winding staircase, through a narrow hallway that smelled of damp wood, until she reached a door at the far end of the cellar, a door she hadn't noticed before. It was heavy and locked, but the rusted frame had begun to rot from years of neglect. With small, determined hands, she pushed, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single broken bulb swinging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves, but there were no books. Only old baby shoes, tiny clothes folded neatly, and a small wooden cradle tucked into a corner. On the far side, a wardrobe stood ajar, revealing Adaora's scarf, the same one she was known to wear every Sunday, and a pair of matching boys' jackets still hanging as if waiting to be worn. The room hadn't been touched in years, but there was no dust, no cobwebs, just stillness. Eniola's breath caught. She moved toward the cradle, where a worn teddy bear rested, its stitched smile faded, and just as her fingers brushed the edge, the humming stopped. A new sound filled the air, a deep sigh, close, as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing. The air was still, but she wasn't alone. Something in that room was watching. Not with malice, but with sorrow. In that hidden room, the walls didn't just hold memories, they held presence. And Eniola knew then, this mansion wasn't just haunted by grief, it was built on it. By the following evening, the air around the mansion felt heavier, almost swollen with secrets on the verge of bursting. Eniola hadn't planned to return so soon, but something pulled her back. The humming hadn't returned, but the memory of that sigh, the presence she'd felt in the hidden room, lingered in her chest, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. This time, she didn't sneak in. The front doors were ajar. The air inside had changed. It was no longer just quiet, it was expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath. She found Chief Dorojaye in his bed, barely a shadow of the man the village once feared. His skin had paled, his lips dry, and his eyes wandered the room as though tracking unseen figures. Eniola hesitated at the door, unsure if he even knew she was there. But then, slowly, his gaze fixed on her. There was no surprise, no confusion, just recognition. Like he had been waiting for her, his voice was faint and cracked, barely above a whisper. "She sent you," he murmured. "Adaora, always gentle, always forgiving." Eniola moved closer, though fear gripped her ankles like chains. The chief reached beneath his pillow and pulled out an old photo, faded at the edges. It showed Adaora holding their two boys, her smile soft and serene. He stared at it, tears slipping down the sides of his face, and began to speak, not to Eniola, but to the shadows around the room. He spoke of love turned to rage, of suspicion that grew like a sickness in his heart. How he had accused Adaora of betrayal, convinced she planned to take the children away forever. How, in a moment clouded by jealousy and pride, he made a decision no man should ever make. He hadn't meant to kill her, he said. He only meant to scare her. But rage doesn't know how to stop. The boys had witnessed it. They had cried for their mother, clung to her body. He hadn't the strength to face what he'd done, so he called men, silent, loyal, paid well, and had the bodies buried beneath the garden under cover of darkness. A part of him had died that night, but his body lived on, carrying the weight in silence. "I begged God to take the guilt," he whispered, "but he left me with it, maybe because I never asked forgiveness from the right ones." Then his eyes turned to Eniola, hollow yet soft. "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell her I never stopped loving her." His hand went limp. The photo slid from his fingers onto the bed. The air shifted. A gust of cold wind moved through the room, though every window was shut. The curtains fluttered gently, and for a moment, Eniola thought she saw a faint outline of a woman at the foot of the bed, not angry, not vengeful, just watching. Then she was gone. And the house exhaled. The sun rose gently over the village, casting golden light across rooftops and illuminating the dew that clung to every blade of grass. For the first time in years, the mansion no longer looked haunted. It looked hollow, quiet, but somehow at peace. No more strange cries, no more flickering lights. The villagers noticed it too. Mama Efe, the spice seller, paused in front of the gate and whispered a prayer. The old butcher crossed himself before opening his stall. Even the children, who used to race past in fear, now lingered by the fence, staring with wide eyes at the sudden bloom of white flowers in the garden. Eniola remained near the mansion for a few more days. She didn't enter again. She didn't need to. The presence that once clung to the walls had left. The humming, the whispers, the sighs, they had quieted. She would sit near the garden and watch the flowers sway gently in the breeze, her fruit tray beside her, filled once more with ripe mangoes, as though the earth itself was rewarding her for listening. No one else knew what had truly happened inside that house. To the villagers, Chief Durojaye died of illness and age. The truth, the confession, the blooming flowers, those were secrets Eniola carried in her small chest like sacred treasure. She never told anyone what she saw rise from the soil, or how the cries stopped the moment the old man whispered his last apology. Some truths, she felt, were not meant for everyone. Some were given only to those willing to listen. One afternoon, as she walked past the now empty mansion, she looked back one final time. The wind brushed her cheeks, and for a heartbeat, she thought she heard soft laughter, the kind children make when they're safe and free. She smiled. Then she walked on, barefoot but strong, her steps steady, her heart full. Stories like Eniola's remind us that even in the quietest corners, truth waits to be heard. Sometimes, it takes the smallest voice to uncover what power and pride try to bury. And sometimes, the soil itself speaks, if only we're still enough to listen. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Africa, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. There are more stories waiting beneath the surface. Real, raw, and unforgettable.